Okay, there we go. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second part of the LCA webinars presented to you by Material Innovation Initiative in collaboration with Earthshift Global. I'm Ranjani. I'm the environmental data scientist at Material Innovation Initiative. Thank you for joining us here. Today's presentation will focus on best practices for communicating sustainability-based innovation. Before the webinar, I'd like to give a brief intro about MII and our awesome speaker here today. MII is a nonprofit organization, and we basically work to accelerate the development of high-performance, animal-free, and environmentally preferred materials. The primary results of our work are mostly reports. We are a think tank, so we share our resources. It's all publicly available and free of cost to our stakeholders and interested parties. So our main work deals with manifesting efforts in reports that establish a link between our stakeholders and meticulously researched and analyzed information within the next-gen material industry. These reports serve to bolster their narratives regarding opportunities and untapped potential for growth within the dynamic sector. This webinar series is one of the offerings of the EDC initiative we have been working on since the past year. And what does EDC do? EDC serves as a platform to bring together key stakeholders to identify and discuss the issues that persist in the LCA analysis within the next-gen material industry. The approach we take for this is basically literature review and also interviewing material companies that are in the next-gen material sector. And we try to collect this information to address challenges. Right now is just collecting data regarding what are the major challenges for the sustainability analysis. And let's go on and introduce our speaker for today, Karen Fleming. And she has over 25 years of experience in marketing and in product development, strategy, and business management. With her 2 decades of unwavering commitment to sustainable business practices, she has held leadership positions at renowned organizations like Stonyfield Farm, Seven Generation, contributing to their success. Beyond her corporate accomplishments, Karen's dedication extends to coaching both B2B enterprises and nonprofit organizations, sharing her expertise to drive positive change. Her substantial teaching skills have reflected in her roles as a professor and director of sustainable MBA program at Green Mountain College, an institution synonymous with sustainability excellence. Karen's educational journey includes earning an MBA at Harvard University and a BA from Dartmouth College, underlining her strong foundation in academia as well. I'm sure you're all eager to hear her insights from her extensive knowledge in sustainable business, marketing, and entrepreneurship, and skills that bridge the corporate and educational realms. Please join us in welcoming Karen. Just give me a minute. Also, I would like to mention that we'll be taking the question and answers. You can put them in the chat box, and we'll be answering them towards the end of the presentation. So please have patience. And I'll just get Karen's presentation up here. All right. Now, let me share another slide. Okay, there you go. Karen, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Ranjani, and thank you so much for inviting me to present today. I'm very excited to share best practices for communicating sustainably based innovation. To start, I'd like to share a little bit about Earthshift Global. Our firm is a leader in life cycle assessment and sustainability consulting. And we're very passionate about partnering with our clients to advance their sustainability. We've been doing this for over 20 years, and we're deeply involved in the advancement of the LCA methodology as well as the performance of LCA. We work for a wide variety of companies of all sizes. In today's discussion, I'm going to focus more on the types of applications of sustainability that are relevant to people that are such as material innovators who are looking at how to develop new solutions. My role at Earthshift Global is I support the company's marketing as the Chief Marketing Officer, and I also support our clients with strategic guidance as well as communications guidance. So let's dig in. What we're going to talk about today is we'll start with a quick definition of sustainability from a triple bottom line perspective. And as you can see from my background with an MBA, my focus is very much on the business applications of sustainability and how to apply sustainability to move businesses forward across all the bottom lines. We'll do a quick review of anticipatory LCA, which our CEO, Lisa Lauren, presented as the first part of this webinar series. And then we'll shift into an exploration of the best practices. And I'm going to share with you my best practices related to positioning as well as communications. And we'll be able to explore those best practices through 3 case studies for clients that we've had the opportunity to support at Earthshift Global. And then we'll summarize and move to a quick Q&A. So to start, sustainability. I really like this approach to defining sustainability, and that is that to be sustainable means to be ongoing. So what does that look like when we're looking at the triple bottom line of managing for sustainability? Well, obviously, to be an ongoing concern, an organization must be profitable. So we manage for profitability, for sustainability. And in addition to managing for ongoing profitability for the financial bottom line, we're also looking at what can we do to be more sustainable in our use of the Earth's resources. So that's our environmental bottom line. And then how can we support human health and wellness, which is the social bottom line. And so as a sustainable business, what we're doing is we're looking at our impacts, managing that triple bottom line with the goal of trying to be sustainable across all 3 bottom lines. And we know that this is perfection to be able to achieve that. And there isn't any organization at this point in time that is perfect in their sustainability. So what we're doing is we're progressing towards that perfection. And then that requires us to be very thoughtful about how do we apply sustainability in our particular organization. Sustainability is not a cookie cutter approach. It requires a lot of complex analysis and thinking. And that's the type of work that we do at Earthshift Global and that I'm personally passionate about. So why is this an important focus? Well, sustainability is a growing priority. And you can see from this slide that the majority of large companies in the United States and around the world are now reporting on sustainability. And the UN has established sustainable development goals as well as climate goals that are also encouraging organizations of all types and sizes to consider sustainability and how they're managing their business. So this is a growing trend and will only continue to increase in importance as more and more information comes available about our opportunities to address these important impacts. The other reason that sustainability is a growing priority for a lot of organizations is, as an organization, we are getting more stakeholder pressures for how we're managing our operations. So we're getting pressure from consumers. And interestingly, it was consumer demand and interest in sustainability that has been the initial driver for this growing interest in sustainability. And then that in turn has been putting pressure on organizations and their other stakeholders, such as their supply chain partners, to increase their emphasis on sustainability. As a startup or a new innovator organization or a material innovator, investors are often an important stakeholder group to consider, because a lot of early stage organizations, or if you're developing a new product or material, that can require capital. And that's where going to outside investors becomes critical. And we can use sustainability as a way to interest investors in our new innovations. So let's talk a little bit about life cycle assessment. And what's key to remember is this is a scientific method, and it's used to help us understand the impacts across the entire life cycle. So we are able, through life cycle assessment, to understand the flows of energy, the flows of materials through every step of the life cycle process, starting with resource extraction, the production, transportation, use, and disposal of these products. And this ISO standard-based scientific method allows us to measure the impacts of our product or processes. And by measuring the impacts, it also helps us to understand the relative prioritization of the parts of the life cycle that are creating these impacts. And this helps us to be much more strategic in how we develop strategies to address those impacts. In particular, there's a type of LCA called anticipatory LCA, and this is used at the very earliest stages of a new product development or a new process development. And what's exciting about anticipatory LCA is the ability to start earlier, before a lot of the environmental impacts are locked in at the design stage, so that we can be really thoughtful and use that guidance to help us refine and innovate. And we can do that at every stage in the development process. So whether we're in the early stages, we can also use anticipatory LCA to help us understand how to tweak our process or our product to reduce its impacts. So it can be a really valuable tool to help us design and develop the innovative products to reduce their impacts. So with that as background, that we know sustainability is an emerging and growing priority, we also understand that there are tools such as anticipatory LCA that we can use to help us design our sustainability strategies. Now what we're going to do is shift to how do we communicate our sustainability-based innovations? What are these best practices? And when I approach this, I think about this in two separate areas. The first is positioning. How do we position this innovation to best take advantage of the innovation and align with our overall business goals? And then how do we communicate the sustainability-based innovation? And we're going to start with communications first. Because sustainability is becoming such an important focus, what is happening is it's encouraging a lot of organizations to join the sustainability bandwagon. And what regulatory and guideline requirements are meant to do is to provide a level playing field for all of the organizations that are engaged in sustainability-based communications. And these regulatory guidelines have come forward primarily to provide guidance and to ensure that level playing field. So this is obviously the first screen when we're developing communications, or that we must make sure that they abide by these requirements. So in the United States, the Federal Trade Commission has what is called the Green Guide. And the FTC's Green Guides are designed to give us guidance to help us avoid making environmental claims that mislead consumers. So they were first developed in 1992, and they were most recently updated in 2012. And every time that they're updated, they're addressing new concerns that might come forward. So we want to be compliant with this Green Guide in our communications, because there are consequences. If you are found to be deceptive in your communications, you could be subject to fees and other types of actions. The next regulatory body that we need to be aware of is, in the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission has proposed new rule changes that would extend the climate-related disclosures for certain organizations. And one of the discussions as part of this is a requirement that companies report not just their scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are emissions based on their operations and energy that they purchase, but also report on scope 3 emissions, which are emissions that occur with their product or process use outside of the organization. So this required a lot of discussion and time and input, and now the rules are they're set to be voted on this October, unless those change. In addition to the FTC and the SEC in the United States, we also have to be aware of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that's coming from the European Union. So in Europe, the EU has developed what is called the Green Deal, where they have set an objective for Europe to be the first climate neutral organization by the year 2050. And because of that objective, they are now creating these sorts of directives and guidelines and standards to help encourage organizations to move in the direction of supporting that Green Deal. In November of last year, these new standards were introduced, and they will require mandatory reporting. So this is a significant notable shift in terms of the types of reporting that companies will be required to do. There are many voluntary reporting standards, such as GRI, that are used in sustainability reporting and communications. What the EU is doing here is making this mandatory. And it will be phased in, so it will start with the largest organizations that will need to start reporting starting in 2 to 3 years. And this it will eventually be cascaded down to smaller organizations as well. If you are a US-based company, you also need to be aware of this directive, because in addition to applying to large European organizations as measured by revenue or employee count, this directive also applies to US-based subsidiaries of a certain revenue or employee-based size. So this is an imperative that organizations must be aware of. And large organizations have to report first, but what we also can anticipate, and we're seeing already, is that those large organizations are going to be putting pressure on their supply chain to help them achieve and report. And that is going to mean that the pressures for the reporting and the pressures for sustainability are going to be pushed back into the supply chain and the suppliers to these large organizations. So companies of all sizes, and particularly large companies, need to be aware of this new directive, and companies that are suppliers to these large companies should also be aware of this new directive. When we look at the SEC versus the CSRD reporting requirements, they're basically very different in terms of the SEC is focused on climate disclosures, and it's going to be more patient in having companies report. By comparison, the CSRD is going to be much more comprehensive, and that application is starting within the next 2 to 3 years. One of the key changes coming out of the European standards is an emphasis on double materiality. So I am going to make sure that we understand what we mean by double materiality, because this is definitely an emerging trend in how companies need to think about their sustainability programs. So what double materiality gets at is, we are in a single materiality study, we are asking the stakeholders what they think is important and what is going to impact the company. So it's very much focused on the perceptions of the stakeholders. With a double materiality approach, what we're adding is the measurement of the actual impacts of the organization. And so when you are able to combine, here's what the stakeholders care about, here's what is measurably most important, and you're able to put those together, this is what helps you to prioritize your sustainability initiatives. So this is really going to be a critical focus going forward for these directives, and that organizations need to take into consideration is that we as organizations are going to be expected to understand and report those impacts that are material to the impact on our operations and our material impacts on the environment and people. ISO also has standards for communicating environmental information through environmental labels and declarations. And we can do these sorts of LCA studies as well to help to identify and support these sorts of claims. An important, a very vital important point about communications guidance for LCA is there are different stages of an LCA study. A screening LCA is the first stage, and as it implies, it's a faster screen. And so what that means is that for a screening LCA, the ISO standards do not allow you to communicate the results publicly. Similarly, for a full LCA, which is a more rigorous type of LCA, it still has not met ISO standards for external sharing. So we at Ursulf Global strongly recommend to our clients who conduct screening or full LCAs that they only use the results internally to help them in their innovation and their process improvements. If they do want to share the results, then they should do so under a non-disclosure agreement and clearly identifying the results as preliminary, and only doing so with qualified stakeholders that you know you can maintain, or at least have a higher likelihood of maintaining control of that information. In order to share LCA results publicly with an external audience, the ISO standards require a critical review. And that's something that it's a step that is done by an independent expert or panel of experts that verifies the work that was done by the original LCA consultancy. So we only share our LCA results if they've been critically reviewed. Important note. Okay, next best practice for communications is avoiding greenwashing. So this is a term that speaks to when companies appear to be more green than they actually are. And this can be that they exaggerate or fabricate. It also can be that they focus on something that is deflecting attention from activities that are actually more environmentally harmful. So with greenwashing, the risk here is a negative impact on the reputation of the organization. And we know when we are managing our brand that our reputation is one of the most important elements of that. So we want to ensure in all of our communications that what we are sharing is accurate. And specifically, some additional suggestions on how to avoid greenwashing include you really, if you can, you should avoid using buzzwords. And this is in particular an area of interest that the FTC has gotten involved in terms of terms such as recyclable. If you say that your product is recyclable, you must be able to demonstrate that it is recyclable at enough recycling centers that it reaches a recyclable threshold. So it's not enough to just say recyclable if it's actually very difficult for you to recycle your product. Similarly with biodegradable, not all products biodegrade, or they don't do so within a reasonable amount of time. So when we are thinking about how we're communicating these sorts of benefits, where possible, we want to try to be more specific and avoid these kind of buzzwords. And one of the ways that we can be more specific is to establish evidence to support our claims. So wherever possible, if we are making a claim, we should strive to have some sort of evidence that supports that claim. That is going to reduce the risk that we're going to be accused of greenwashing, and it's going to allow us to feel a lot more confident in what we're providing in our communications. And where possible, if you can have an external reputable firm validate your claims, that is further going to give confidence and credibility in what you're saying. Now we're going to shift to best practices as it relates to positioning. And here, the big idea, the key idea is you want to align what you're talking about and how you're positioning your sustainability and innovation with the core stakeholder benefits. And what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through 3 case studies where I will demonstrate how they are positioning and communicating their sustainability innovation. So the first one is Biofine Technology. This is an organization based in New England that has developed an advanced biofuel that's derived from cellulose. So it can use cellulose waste, recycled paper, bark, wood chips, and convert that into a low carbon biofuel that is directly substitutable for home heating oil with just minor retrofitting of the oil furnace. So this obviously is an important material innovation in that it addresses the carbon emissions that flow from the use of home heating oil. And not surprisingly, because this is a direct substitution for a high carbon emitting fuel, Biofine is positioning its biofuel as a low carbon alternative to conventional home heating oil. How are they communicating this? So when we're thinking about, here's this innovation, it's all about reducing emissions by replacing the type of heating oil. Who are you going to reach out to in order to build this demand for this particular innovation? Well, the first target audience that Biofine reached out to were investors. And that was because they needed to bring in capital to build the pilot plant to prove this new process. And so they worked with us to develop a screening LCA that was critically reviewed And that screening LCA was used to then leverage support to secure additional investor capital from some Maine-based entrepreneurial groups, as well as additional investors from outside of their Maine region. They also used it most recently to establish a distributor relationship with a leading Maine-based oil dealer. So they used the communications of their LCA to secure both investor capital as well as a key customer relationship. And in terms of their actual communications, because they're a B2B company, their primary communications are happening between them and investors and their customer targets and through press releases. And so I've included here a couple of snippets from their joint press release where they're celebrating the potential for this new fuel to reduce the carbon emissions in this region. If you are interested in reading this LCA study, the full critically reviewed study is available on our website, and I've put a link at the bottom of the slide. It's easily found at earthshiftglobal.com in our case studies area. Okay, moving on to Navitas. So Navitas Semiconductor was founded in 2014, and they developed a unique integrated circuit that uses GaN. And what this allows their chip to do is to have a much higher level of energy efficiency. And it also allows important design opportunities. So what's interesting here in terms of positioning is that Navitas could have positioned based on reducing their carbon emissions. But what they understand is that that reduction in carbon emissions, while important, is not the most important benefit of their chip to product developers who are a core target audience for them. And so what Navitas has chosen to do is to really focus their positioning of their innovation, that it supports the product developer's ability to design smaller, lighter, and faster components. And by the way, it also reduces the energy consumption. And this is an important distinction. When we think about and we compare it to what Biofine did, it made sense that Biofine positioned based on the carbon emissions because that was the nature of their innovation solution. It makes sense that Navitas is positioning based on how their chip is going to enable the developers to design even better chips for their customers. And if we look at the communications for Navitas, again, we performed an LCA for Navitas, and we did what was called a comparative LCA, comparing the impacts of their integrated circuit chip to a conventional silicone-based circuit chip. And that enabled them to talk about the climate change benefits of their chip, which is a meaningful part of the positioning. And as I've already said, not the only part, but an important part. And this LCA was used by the company to attract investors and also customer interest in this startup company. They also use the LCA to substantiate and position themselves as achieving net zero. And in terms of how they communicate, again, this is a B2B organization. Most of their communications are happening between them and their target customers and them and their investors, and through press releases. And I've included a link here where they have a press release to their announcements of being the first carbon neutral certified semiconductor company. Our final case study is about Bolt Threads. So Bolt Threads was founded in 2009, and They're a really unique company. They produce innovative materials, including Milo, which is a mushroom or mycelium-based replacement for synthetic and natural leathers. So this company was founded on a sustainability premise that they wanted to pursue products, solutions, and innovations that had less hazardous chemistry. They wanted to reduce the life cycle impacts, and they wanted to avoid any sort of non-ethical labor or production practices. And so what we did for them was we conducted an LCA where we looked at their product compared to regular leather as well as other forms of synthetic leather. And so when you think about, how could Bolt Threads position itself? Well, its impacts on climate change are significantly less than traditional leather. But that's not what they're positioning on. They've decided to position on their product, their Milo, is as a vegan alternative to leather. So that's the core benefit for a product designer in choosing a material. And what they were able to do is they used the LCA to then develop some of their early relationships with designers. So Stella McCartney is a brand that is known for using non-animal inputs into her clothing designs and production. So this was a natural fit for Bolt Threads to reach out to Stella McCartney and offer the Milo product. And in addition to Stella McCartney, the Milo leather is also being incorporated into products by Adidas and several other leading design brands. So the LCA was able to support the relative benefits, and the fact that it's vegan is what is appealing to these brands like Stella McCartney. Now, how is Bolt Threads communicating its innovative material? Well, one way is the CEO of the company, Dan Widmeyer, has done a TED Talk. And in it, he talks about how fashion now can start to incorporate these other types of materials that have a lighter impact on the planet. And in addition, because here's a brand that is engaged not just in B2B communications, but also B2C, business to consumer communications. And so you can see that they are also very engaged in placing stories in publications that are going to reach an investor audience as well as that consumer audience. So I've included a couple of links to articles that have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, in Bloomberg, and interestingly in Teen Vogue as well. And these are all focused on building awareness of this solution of the Milo and creating that demand for this new innovative product. So to summarize, we know there's a growing demand for sustainability. And what's exciting is that this provides opportunities for new innovations throughout every step of the supply chain. We can use life cycle assessment to help guide those innovations and also to use LCA results that have gone through critical review to share and support the interest in the sustainability innovation for an organization. When we have a sustainable based innovation, we want to be thoughtful about how we communicate this. And so we want to be thoughtful about two primary areas of emphasis. One is, how do we position this? And when we look at the possible communication points, we want to distill it down to those key points that align the sustainability with those core stakeholder benefits. And when we actually craft our communications, We want to take into consideration all of the available applicable regulations and guidelines and avoid greenwashing and think about how are we going to develop these targeted communications that are going to hit those stakeholder groups that's really going to help us advance our sustainability. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I can't hear you.
I was on mute. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. That was such a good presentation about all the protocols you need to follow before you communicate your sustainability about your product.
Mhm.
And you made us aware about all of those guidelines that are existing, because a lot of them we don't even get to know till we really want to learn about them. And also, I have a couple of questions here. Before we go into that, I know that you mentioned that not to use buzzwords and how you want everyone to follow certain guidelines, right?
Mhm.
What do you think, like these new innovators, they're literally smaller companies
Mhm.
who don't have a lot of resources to go into marketing, and sometimes they're trying to connect with brands to adopt their materials. What do you think they can do different to fight, like, because there are bigger players also in the industry, but these smaller firms, how can they put their foot forward in front of these big players, existing big players, with the terms and all of that exists right now?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, and then please let me know if you want to further elaborate that.
Sure.
I think the first part of your question was, I'm a smaller firm. I don't have experience. I
Yes.
don't have a lot of knowledge of sustainability. I don't know how to start. And there are risks if I do it wrong.
Yes.
Right? So
Yeah.
what do I do?
Yes.
And so what I would advise is rip it off. Like, in marketing, we can go to other examples and we can learn from those other examples and apply them to us. So a specific recommendation I would have is, if you have a material innovator that knows that their particular material is going to be of particular interest to a large company, go to that large company's website and then Google them and get as much information you can about how they're talking about their sustainability. And so look at the language that they're using and use that language to inform your own communications. And if you do that, you're going to be in good stead, because they've most likely been very thoughtful in how they've crafted it. It's also going to give you ideas for how you can be positioning yourself to them.
That is great advice. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have a couple of questions, very knowledgeable questions here. So I'm going to read them out for you to answer.
Mhm.
They say, Kevin has a question about, of all the potential impacts documented in the ISO 14040 and
Mhm.
44 LCA results, there seems to be a myopic focus on the GWP, which is the global warming potential.
Mhm.
As the exponential growth of our economy increasingly approaches petroleum-based biophysical limits, what would be an effective means to communicate a value proposition based on renewable sources of carbon, especially relative to polyester fibers that may have lower carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram, but not be renewable?
Wow, I love this question. It's incredibly detailed, and obviously Kevin is very knowledgeable about LCA. So, yes, we understand why there is such an emphasis on the global warming potential impact category, because companies are responding to the global imperative to reduce carbon and strive to achieve carbon neutrality by a certain period of time. So we understand why that is an important focus. That said, as I shared in the case study examples, just because you can talk about global warming potential doesn't mean that that's where you're going to be focusing in your communications, because you want to position yourself to align those benefits with those core product benefits. That is going to help you move the needle more quickly. I do want to note that whenever Earthshift Global conducts life cycle assessments, we always include the full 20 or so impact categories, or we will work with our clients to prioritize which impact categories are most relevant to them. So for us, we never just do the climate impact. That might be what is reported out, but that doesn't mean that that's the only impact category that we're looking at.
Yeah, so true. So true. It's important to put in all the impact categories.
Mm-hmm.
You never know where you are running out of balance.
That's true. And it provides that information so that you can understand the trade-offs, right? Yeah. So my energy is high here and the water is low there, but if I reduce energy, maybe it actually impacts. So, those are all parts of scenario planning and the what ifs that we do when we're really looking at how do we help our clients to innovate in a way that is going to reduce impacts, not just shift the burden to other areas.
Right. Great. So I'll move on to the next question. Hope, Kevin, you got your response there. Next question is, how expensive is this process for startups? Like, if going through the LCA, the critical review, is it really expensive? So
it's all relative, right? And so I am not comfortable providing any dollar figures because it varies depending on the type of LCA that you're doing. And it can vary dramatically. We can have some single products versus multiple product LCAs, obviously will be different. An LCA where you're comparing yourself to other products will be different. Mm-hmm. The type of LCA, is it just that first stage screening LCA, or is it moving to the full and then the critical review? But we're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars here. This is very affordable for even the small startup companies. And those examples that I gave you were 3 started small and now are growing startup companies. And if people are interested in getting more granular pricing, I'm happy to answer that question. They're welcome to email me, and I can get that ball going once I get more information about their particular LCA.
Sure. And yeah, I will have Camilla put the email up in the chat so that if someone wants to contact Karen, they can do so.
Great.
And next question is from Priya, and she asks, what's the best way to communicate a sustainability-based innovation before the company has conducted a critically reviewed LCA?
So what's the best way? It's to do all that I recommended, right? Think about your positioning, make sure that you are aware of the relevant guidelines or regulations, avoid greenwashing. Ideally, you want to have externally validated claims, but we understand that that's not possible for all products or processes or organizations. What you want to do in the absence of externally validated claim verification is just make sure that you can substantiate all of your claims, right? So if you make a claim, this is non-toxic, for example, what do you need to do to demonstrate that that's truly non-toxic? Well, you don't have to necessarily run a study. You could point to material data safety sheets, for example, that say this material is non-toxic. And therefore, since you're using that as an input, you can provide that as support. So the key is any claim, any and every claim, how are you going to support that if somebody pushes back?
Right. That is great advice. Yeah, you have to have something to back up your claim. And if you have that, then it's okay to step forward and say, my product is so and so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next question is from Simon. What's your opinion regarding publishing EPD as a communication strategy?
It depends on your particular situation. We do a lot of EPD work for companies. It does help to establish you in a particular market. So I think it's something to consider as an effective communications approach. We support clients with that. We also support clients with writing white papers, because that is a communications approach that can be very effective for a new material or process as well.
Okay. I think Deb has a question, but I don't know if it's exactly relevant. Talking about like products and services, there's a difference in how you claim sustainability. So they probably have a sustainability service rather than a material or a product. Would LCA still be a good idea for an enterprise level, like a service than a product?
Yes, LCA can be done. There's an LCA approach called organizational LCA that measures the impact of the organization. And that can be used by service-based organizations as well as product-based organizations. I mean, service, it does have different characteristics, right? There's nothing tangible. It's very reliant on the person delivering the service. So there are unique qualities of a service versus a product. And we also can apply LCA. In fact, on our website, we did an organizational LCA of Earthshift Global. So if you're curious about that, you can search for that on our website. We wrote a blog article about it.
Definitely should. I will check it out, and I'm sure our audience will too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is the end of the questions from our audience. And I'm pretty much so enlightened today about how to communicate on sustainability. And I'm gonna wrap up now with Karen being here. We thank you so much. We thank Earthshift Global for collaborating with us and being here to help us enlighten our stakeholders to make their sustainability journey more easier and more knowledgeable. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Camilla, I would like the slides, please. Thank you. Yeah. So now that we saw both the webinars, I'm not sure if everyone attended the first one, but if you have not, you could still access the recording of the LCA webinar 1, which was on anticipatory LCA by Lisa Lauren from Earthshift Global. And now I would like to talk about our initiative before we close this session. At MII, our initiatives serve as a vital nexus, uniting materials companies, scientists, entrepreneurs, brands, and investors. By facilitating connections, sharing knowledge, and championing science and innovation, we are nurturing a dynamic global marketplace for next-gen materials. Our focus is to connect fashion, automotive, and home goods industries to drive progress and transforming possibilities. So please join us in shaping the future of our materials. MII's impactful endeavors thrive through the support of philanthropy, foundations, and corporate partnerships, sponsorships, and donors. So we thank you for being a part of this and joining us today. Your solid interest and support are deeply appreciated. And thanks again. If you have any questions, please feel free to write to us at edc@materialinnovation.org or my first name, Ranjani@materialinnovation.org. And we have Karen's email in the chat there. So please feel free to connect to us. Thank you again. Goodbye.